And hello and welcome to AleksConnects Creative Sandbox. This is Tony. My name is Alex, and today we continue to work on simplification. Couple of quick changes. We're going to cover like a couple of kind of updates to how we're going to proceed streams from now on. And especially kind of touch upon creative stuff, how it's going to continue from now on. So let's just check the sound, quickly cover it, and continue with everything that we creative stuff, how it's going to continue. Okay, stream is kind of lagged a bit. So right before I actually kind of started the stream, there was quite a bit of lag. So hopefully it's fine. Yes, everything is fine now. So yeah, so we continue to work with simplification, which is exactly the thing that we're going to continue to do today. But before that, I already covered this on Russian streams, and we didn't talk about it in English streams yet, so I will cover it like just quickly. So one of the things that I decided to do after our Friday Magic the Gathering stream, that I'm going to move all gaming content, including Magic the Gathering streams, to Alex Tabletops completely to the YouTube channel, because I kind of already wanted to separate Magic from Twitch for a lot of time, but I basically created a lot of I don't know, some kind of an excuses not to do that and continue to stream Magic and creative in one platform. But after New Year's transition, Brain Games Days and Storytelling Games Days, which are still paused, but either way, the decision to translate them onto Alex Tabletops, then basically I slowly started to understand, okay, if now I'm going to move almost half of the gaming content from Twitch, like why I should continue to stream Magic here too. And one of the reasons to remove Magic from here and actually move it to Twitch, I'm not going to be able to fully give myself to creative and to Magic. There's always going to be some kind of a weird balance between this, and I struggled throughout the year like maintaining creating decent content for streams, Magic and creative, and I was not here nor there. Like, there was part of this channel where we streamed only Magic content and didn't stream creative at all. It was part where we streamed only creative, didn't stream Magic, like was especially at the beginning. So again, it was a weird kind of thing. I tried a lot of stuff, I tested things, I tested the ground, and after these basically tests, I started like intuitively feel like, okay, no matter how no matter how hard I would want to stream everything in one platform, it's just not going to work, because when we're going to get some subscribers hopefully at some point, it's just not going to be fair for them to basically kind of charge them a certain amount of price just for 1 or 2 streams of Magic per week. The same goes for creative. It's just not enough creative streams in a week. And because of that, I just decided, okay, to be fair, in order to be fair for future subscribers and for the viewers, like regardless if they're going to subscribe or not, just to be fair for the viewers, for the followers, and personally for me, of course, like to be fair personally to myself, is the best idea for me is to basically focus from now on AleksConnects Twitch only on creative part. We're going to implement some tabletop aspects later, because originally AleksConnects was created to basically work with art creation and creation of tabletop games in the future. But since there's a long way to go before we will start to create any type of tabletop games, there's going to be probably at least a couple of years, so maybe even more. So the thing that it's coming soon, it's truly coming soon. The soon is in quotes. It could be any time period, 2 years, 3 years, maybe ever. I don't know. It isn't like, I don't know. But hopefully at some point we will implement creative streams when we're going to work with creating our own tabletop games. We're going to work with designs. We're going to work with drawing illustrations, creating illustration for cards, and creating mechanics, testing it in inside of the game, and etc. So these type of streams, although there are going to be game related, we're not going to play necessarily, we're going to create, which is the whole point of the AleksConnects creative sandbox. Create stuff. And I mean, and the gaming part right here is just not working. I mean, in terms of the design, in terms of the whole atmosphere, it's just always felt wrong to me personally. And although ideally the only way to become a better Magic streamer is to continue to stream on Twitch, because YouTube doesn't provide you with that many opportunities when it comes down to streaming. There's no extensions, there's no kind of drops out there. If they start to utilize any type of like stream game integrations, it's always going to be on Twitch and probably never going to be on YouTube. So because of this, ideally, like, it's not going to be good for Magic. But again, by focusing AleksConnects creative sandbox on the creative stuff, which is the whole point of it, I'm going to now basically create more creative content, and now I'm going to focus on creative content here, which is awesome. And we will continue to create separate videos for Alex Tabletops, and it's going to be a completely separate kind of a place. We're not going to talk about Alex Tabletops here at all. I mean, probably maybe on Tuesdays and Fridays before streaming, before switching to a YouTube stream, because new streams that we're going to add are going to be added on Tuesdays and on Fridays. Fridays are going to be, of course, Russian streams. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday are going to be Russian streams, and English streams are going to be Monday, such as today, Tuesday, which is going to be tomorrow, and right after tomorrow's stream, like, we're going to stream for like 1 hour and 45 minutes or something like that, so almost 2 hours, and then like 50 minutes till 12 a.m. I will have to go and stream Magic on YouTube. So it's kind of going to be not an easy task to do, just basically switching a platform, but this is the best decision that I come up with, because this decision is already like it's pending for probably at least like 6 months or so, maybe even more, and we need to make this decision. This is the only solution that I see how to make AleksConnects creative sandbox a little bit more kind of oriented around creative stuff. So yeah, sorry, like, I didn't want to talk about this that much, but again, this is a part of my journey. Hopefully, if you are interested in it, it's going to be a part of your journey. Again, I want to share in my streams what I'm doing, why I'm making certain decisions, in order to create some type of examples for people, if they're willing to basically I don't know, take this information in their own way somehow. I mean, if you will be able to learn from it, from my experiences, and not to make certain mistakes, it's always a good thing. But again, the best way to learn from things is to learn from your own personal mistakes, not waiting for others to basically go through them. But it's still kind of a good way to learn, because again, in reality, we can learn multiple ways. We can learn from our own mistakes, which is called, like, I believe, a direct way of learning, and there's always going to be some type of a secondary way of learning when we're not necessarily doing this directly, but like vicariously through other people. So like we looking what things they are doing, how they're operating, and based on that, we kind of picturing ourselves in their situations and making our own personal decisions. So this is the way to learn too. So if you will use this to basically kind of what I'm talking about, like about why I'm making those decisions, and apply to your personal stuff, if it's going to help you in some way, it's going to be awesome. Even if not, I still kind of want to share it, because it's a good thing for me. It's like a therapy, I would say, when you share those things. It truly works like it's some kind of a therapy when you're sharing those stuff. It just basically helps you justify your decisions and make sure that decisions that you're going to make are going to work, and it's not just something that you made out of fear or out of certain inconvenience or whatever. Either way, so again, just final thing, and I'm going to finish, and we will start to work on simplification. So again, I'm happy to say that now we're going to focus on creative only on Twitch, which is awesome. Again, decision that had to be made, that had to be done throughout like probably at least 6 months or so. Finally made it, finally realized it. But like Friday was the last Magic streams that we did. From now on, all Magic streams are going to be on YouTube, Alex Tabletops, which is a perfect place for them. Again, it's not going to work as well as probably on Twitch because there's not that many audience and there's not that many streamers, but who knows, maybe we'll create our own niche there, because again, right here on Twitch there's a lot of competition and on YouTube there's just none. So maybe like in this lack of competition we will rise from the ashes. Who knows? So you never know. So maybe this decision is going to be a blessing in disguise, so who knows. But again, there is a lot of reasons behind making this decision, and I believe that this is the right one, because so far all decisions that I made, slowly but surely they are working. So there was no decisions that I made that I basically regretting. I mean, in terms of like how to stream, where to stream, what exactly to stream. I mean, if I'm truly like understanding that I'm like heading into the wrong direction, I'm right away switching to a proper direction. We did this with creating portraits, like starting to create portraits too early. I kind of wanted to rush things. It was kind of a mistake of some kind, but still it was a learning experience. Now we basically get back to study, and now once we will finish all to work on this base, we will be able to solidify our fundamentals. We will be able to get back to portraits and actually do it right way, not the wrong way and hasty way. So yeah. So again, that's it for this part. So let's just quickly cover what we did. So again, throughout last couple of streams, what we did, especially in Russian streams, yesterday and day before, on Saturday and Sunday, what we did is basically we knew that the next part after we dealt with the foot. So again, we finished with the foot. Once when we finished with the foot, we didn't finish the foot like completely, but it's still more than enough for me personally. I believe it was exactly an English stream that we worked with the foot, so I'm not going to repeat this thing. So the next thing was for us the head, and last couple of days we actually worked on the head. The first thing, since head, again, we're starting to analyze and simplify head from the standpoint of skeleton, continuing to work on the skeleton. So that means that we're not going to simplify the whole face structure. Instead, we're going to simplify head from the standpoint of the skull. And because of this, of course, we had to use the references for the skull, and let me open it again. I'm going to copy paste it again, as always at the beginning of each stream. I believe we need to post some quick info about what we're doing and what we work with. So again, this site we'll continue to use as a skeletal reference for us. This works pretty fine. We found some references of the skull. So this is the reference that I did by myself. So basically I sculpted this skull. I tried to work on anatomy on top of the skull, kind of just basically drawing the version of the scheme a little bit more organically right here, and trying to apply what exactly those things will connect, etc. So, which is pretty cool. So yeah, we found references of different racial, basically ethnics, different genders, from front views and from the side views, in order to basically analyze what design decisions we need to make when we're going to simplify those things. So because of this, we basically decided to start the skeleton, skull with the sphere first. Basically, we again imagining the sphere inside of the cube, then extending. So again, like imagine the cube. Inside of this cube, we have a sphere. Then we pulling this plane, and basically sphere extends again. getting back to our methods that we work with, the methods of changing the sphere without scaling, without working on edges and on points, only working with planes and moving. So which is basically choosing one plane and moving this plane. This is the easiest way to work with the sphere. Of course we could scale, I believe. I mean, like, if we're going to scale, one of the reasons why I, by the way, decided to get rid of the scaling, because if we're going to scale, for instance, this plane only, the scaling is not going to work that well. So because of this, I kind of get rid of the scaling. But if we're going to work on non-individual parts, but on multiple parts, for instance, like select this plane on the back and this plane and make some scaling adjustments, then it's working. So it's not just going to work when it comes down to the individual. That's why we actually set the I here. So no individual scaling, no individual edges manipulation, no individual point manipulation, because if we're going to do that, the sphere will become unrecognizable, which is going to completely break the whole system. So, and we as artists, we need to control what we're doing, and because of this I just decided to kind of create those limitations. The same goes with cylinder and kind of restrictions when it comes down to the points. Again, individual restrictions, not the overall restrictions. And of course, when it comes down to the cube, we'll be able to do everything. We can work with edges, we can work with planes, and by changing them we could create lots of things. Right here we could actually take non-individual scaling by taking one side, the other side of the edge, and scaling them into one big center and producing a completely different primitive. The same goes with the points. Either move them separately, individually, or scale them in coherence, basically, altogether. So yeah, so this is the way that we basically created the sphere, nothing complex. The second thing that we basically did, we took this cube. Wait a minute. Why I have a separate layer here? So let me see. Okay, I don't know. Should we keep this separate layer or not? No, let's just combine them. I don't want to create too many layers. We have already too many of those. So again, then we basically took this cube and cut the sides for the sphere by making it straight, basically flat. Once we did that, again, knowing that this thing first flat, we applied the same method, but cutting the sphere in a little, with a little bit of an angle, because usually skull takes kind of this direction in this area. So because of this, we basically took a little bit like the same approach by cutting away, but cutting away in an angle, and basically we get rid of these parts and we end up with the front view for the skull, at least the simplified version of it, this way. This was our kind of the example how we could simplify the teeth as one unit, because I wouldn't want to separate simplification for each separate tooth. There's 36 of them, it's just too many, or 32, probably 36, doesn't matter. So we could see how many of them though. 32, yeah, 32 teeth. So since there's 32 of them, again, if we're going to draw each tooth separately, it's just too much from on top jaw and a bottom jaw. Instead, it's just easier to simplify them that way. But it's still just an example. We still not got to the teeth, and because we had too many information, I decided to separate it into categories. So we created a category of the cranium, which is again just this part that. Inside of which we have our brain, a separate category for the bottom jaw. The reason why we separated the bottom jaw is because of its functional element. This is, by the way, the next thing that we're going to design today. So the whole idea today is to finish with the bottom jaw. So this is the thing for us to do for today. Also, we kind of separated a separate element of the facial parts. Probably it's wrong. Facial parts. Let me see. No, it's right. So we separated facial parts that are separated into a subcategories: brow bones, cheekbones, nose bone, upper jaw, and there is going to be some type of a transition, but we still don't have an answer for. So again, this is going to be our brow area. So brow bones. It's just going to be kind of start from the brows and go into this part of the skull, and it's going to be designed on top of the sphere, but a little bit further from the sphere. So there is a distance from this to the sphere itself, so which will create this hole that usually created in the skull right here. So yep. So basically we talked about it in a previous session. So again, we decided to just basically like attack it with some kind of a preparedness. So we need to be prepared before start working on this. And for me, preparation, it's planning usually, and once we planned what categories we have, like first, second, third, what each category has inside of it, we actually, like, it was a little bit easier to start working in something instead of just talking about it, which sometimes this is something that we need. So again, brows, bones, or just one big bone, cheekbones, this is this area from both sides. The nose area, which is the middle one. The transitional area is the only area that we kind of it's still in question. One of the reasons to solve this transitional area is either extend the cheek bone and extend the nose bone and connect them together. So this is going to be one solution. The other solution is just like connect them together once we will establish the cheekbone and the nose area. So it all will depend how we're going to design them. Yeah, so the upper jaw, again, it usually extends from this transitional area, so we're not necessarily will be able to design it properly until we're going to solve this questionable area of transition. So again, this is the top part of the facial anatomy of the skull. The bottom part, again, we separated it because of its function. This is something that we're going to solve today. The reason why we separated it due to its function is because again, it's not that easy to work on something that is going to be functionally move. That is going to functionally move. So for instance, one of the reasons why it took so long for us to design all those parts, because we designed them from the standpoint of the function. Our idea was not to design them just by look, but design them by look and by function. So if we're going to choose a certain look for the bone, it needs to support a certain function that this bone has. So like the axis of movement, the limitations of the movement for this bone, and etc. So the same approach we're going to take when we're going to work with the jaw, which is of course a clear one. So yeah, teeth completely separate one is going to be probably the last thing that we're going to be bothered about. It's not something that we're probably going to be simplified to something like this, a little bit more prettier version of it. So again, what we did here is just separating the areas. This is not the way to simplify it. This is just we separated the areas. So basically, in terms of the areas, what we did. So we have our base. So this is the base. So we solved the base, which is good. Then we transitioned to our first extreme. Let's just call it E1. And we solved it, kind of, at least for now. This is our first extreme, and our second extreme is going to be jaw. And we're going to work on them in that specific order. So again, we're starting with the base, which is again a cranium. Then we add into the cranium our extreme 1. Let's just establish what are our extremes. So our brow bones are extreme 1. Extreme 1 or E1. and we have let's just copy this one. Extreme 2, our bottom jaw. This is the thing that we're going to design today. Hopefully we'll manage to do so. Again, today's stream I'm not going to extend it. It's going to be just a regular 2-hour stream. From now on, since now we have 5 days a week of streaming, this is pretty cool. I'm not going to extend stream. It's just it's better for me to stream the exact scheduled time without extending them, if not necessary, of course. If it will become necessary, we will extend them. But ideally, I'm not planning on doing this. So again, like 1.5 hour. In this stream we're going to finish, so we have 1.5 hour, and then we're just basically stop whatever we stopped, make final kind of conclusions, plan what we're going to do next, and finish on that, and that's it. So this is just going to be a better way to not spend too much time on talking, but more time on making things, because I'm going to limit myself in terms of the time. This is one of the reasons why I stopped streaming 4-hour streams and started, okay, we need to stream 2-hour streams in order to not talk too much, but instead just basically do more than talk, which is still sometimes a questionable element. So for instance, our Saturday stream was just talking because my graphic tablet didn't had pen pressure, it needed a reboot. But since I talked for an hour and we had only 1 hour left in that stream, I decided not to relaunch it, and we just continued to talk the remainder of the time. So yeah, so again, we finished our kind of extreme 1, so now we're going to work with extreme 2. Let's just check if I'm properly set the extreme. Extreme. Oh, no, wrong.
Extreme.
Again, without A, just extreme. And E at the end. Hopefully stream is not going to create any problems with the speed. Ideally, like, the visuals could lag a bit, maybe, at some point, but what's not supposed to lag is the sound. So for instance, yesterday's stream, there were a couple of lags for some reason in speed. And betrayed, but you still heard me in audio, so I'm not going to repeat myself, which is good. Extreme. So hopefully it's right. Extreme. Yep, extreme. So again, we have extreme 2, extreme 1, extreme 2, extreme 1. This is something that we already solved. This is the order in which we're going to work with them. So again, just explaining why we're taking this approach with extreme 1 and extreme 2. As I said in the previous stream in Russian, if you're going to work with within certain, if you're going to work on certain design, it's better to understand your extremes for this design. So it's kind of the same, like for instance, again, if you're going to start, so again, I will try to explain myself properly. It's not going to work good, but hopefully I will. So again, we have E1. This is our starting point after we establish the base in terms of the working on the facial features, which are the most kind of the challenging ones, because to simplify a base, it's usually not that hard. It's just one big primitive that it's kind of went through small modifications. So by starting with E1 and like finishing with E1, ideally we could take a route of continuing with the cheekbone and basically work with connecting those parts together, which is one of the approaches. But the problem with this approach, if we don't have any reference in this, like any limitations in terms of the design, if we're actually not going to have this reference, but instead the only thing that we're going to have is this, like our completely new design. Without establishing the proper position of the jaw, we're not going to be able to proportionally make proper design decisions when it comes down to choosing where exactly this jaw is going to end. And this is going to be our problem. So we're not going to be able to design this part of the cheek, not the jaw, cheek, properly without establishing the limitations where exactly the jaw will end. So for that specific reason, we taking the separate route, like working kind of seems chaotically, but actually it's a little bit more structured way of working. We're starting with one extreme, and then we're establishing the second extreme, which is our jaw, and then working from those extremes towards the center. So that which is going to be the nose. So ideally, how we're going to do this, the first thing that we did, of course, after establishing the base, was the creating a brow area, which is kind of a big one. Okay, a minute. I don't know, should I? Let's just delete that one. So again, finished with this one. Still not finally finished. Again, we still need to design this area, but for now, the only reason why we didn't design it fully, because, like, of course, there's not going to be just one point here. Although we created a point, ideally it needs to be something like this. But again, this is a different element of making these things a little bit more complex than it already is. So we started with something a little bit more simple to understand how to approach it, and only then we're going to make better design decisions and make it a little bit more unique, and we're actually going to make it look like the area for the nose. But for now, we just simplified it that way, so it's not a finished one. Also, this thing is going to be curved too. I just kind of created a example that we might picture this one as a plane, but of course this plane is going to be definitely quite curved, because this curvature is created by the skull area that we're connecting it to. So the place of connection could be the center, so, or it could be a little bit further. This is something that we'll establish a little bit later, as we'll get to the final design. So what we're doing. So again, because of this, we need to continue now, after we did this part, with the jaw. Once we kind of finalize at least this extreme, we will be able to work on the inner parts, so the inner areas. So these areas are going to be our priority after we'll finish all extremes. So again, if we're going to design, for instance, the jaw right here, we're not going to think about the inner part of the jaw yet. We're going to think about only the outer part of the jaw to establish this extreme. So the same we did for this one. We thought only about the outer part of this broad jaw. I don't know how to properly name it. And we didn't necessarily took into consideration that much how it's going to look here, because it's just too early. We're not getting there yet. We needed to establish only the outer part. Inner part is going to be designed a little bit later. Because again, sometimes when there's too many things, your brain just can't handle too much information, and you have to know how to separate or delegate some called priorities, I don't know, delegate your tasks. So if you know that the brow bone is going to be a relatively complex one because it has a lot of transition here, kind of a lot of transitions here, so you need to understand how exactly it will transition here, how it will connect to the cheekbone, how it will connect with this, with the nose area, and etc. So there's so many things to do, and of course you have to still figure out how it's going to work here, how it's going to connect to here. There's just too many things to work on at the same time. And because of this, sometimes it's just easier to simplify your thinking first and solve only like the outer problems. Okay, understand how exactly it's going to connect to this part. Okay, cool. Now we know that this transition has to be seamless. So it needs to transition from this curvature to the curvature of the forehead and into the brow bone, which is one big piece for us. We're basically combine it together. So in order to create this transition, you have to start somewhere, and good start is usually coming from the base towards what you need. Then you basically understand the extremes for the sides, the extremes for this, just simplified version, and then once it looks fine, like how it looks, you can continue to the other extreme, and then you will redesign the inner parts once all extremes are established. So yeah, I talked about extremes too much. I guess let's just move forward. Sometimes I'm over explaining myself and repeating things too much. It's a good way for me to make sure that this information is the right information to move towards. Sometimes it's just the way that my brain flows can help it. So it might be annoying. So if it is, sorry, can help it. So, and it's never a bad thing to repeat certain subject in order to make the subject a little bit more understandable for you personally. So the next thing is jaw. So the reason why jaw is going to be hard for us, because it moves. The movement for the jaw is quite extensive. So we're not going to design it, we're not going to look at the model here because we work in sculpting in here, and because of the sculpting, it's actually kind of one big piece, it's just with holes in it, so it's not necessarily a good way to analyze it. We need to analyze it separately as we would look at the actual bones. So again, this is the ear hole. We're not going to necessarily think about it that much yet. A little bit later we will add it. We will add the ear hole as the part of the a little bit more extensive design, because we need to understand where the ear is placed and kind of how ear canal is I don't know, positioned when it comes down to the position of the ear. And this is something that will help us to proportionally set the position of the ear and relate the position of the ear to the proportions of the actual face. So it's kind of an important thing, and it starts with the skull already, which is a pretty cool thing. So yeah, so let's just look at the jaw, analyze it, and decide how exactly we need to attack it. Okay, jaw. The bottom jaw, the one that basically moves. So ideally, jaw has multiple motions. So the first jaw motion let's just picture how approximately it has to work. It's probably going to be a wrong positioning, but still. Let's just imagine that we see through this jaw. Oh, snap. Sorry about that. This sneeze was expected. I'm not feeling that well. I mean, again, I thought that I'm going to sleep well today after 2 days of lacking sleep, but I actually slept not that well, and I still want to sleep. I mean, only like 5 hours or so, more than previous day, which I slept like a couple of hours only, but still. And this is one of the reasons why we're going to finish the stream, maybe even earlier, but I doubt that. So, okay. So when it comes down to the jaw, the movement is basically, let's just take the side. Do we have a side? No, we don't. It's a shame. We need a side view. Let's just take the side view somewhere here. So yeah, we have our base, which is an extended extended sphere. It's just too big. Let's just imagine that we have this extended sphere that got cut away in this area. Then we have a connection for this area, as we created before. Imagine a plane. Then we have like half of extension that will then connect to the cheekbone, which is going to be somewhere here, which will connect to this area. We still need to figure out its design, so let's just simplify it quite a bit for now. Okay, and the placement for the jaw is basically under the cheekbone of some kind. So again, there is a place closer to the ear hole that is basically main rotation happens, the main functional rotation. So the jaw, by the way, in this woman is pretty small. I mean, the whole skull is pretty small. I mean, it's not that wide in length, and it's actually relatively small. So one of the problems with the jaw that I usually have is where exactly the angle of the jaw placed, because each person has the angle of the jaw in a little bit different place. This is going to, and it's not going to be revealed every time. So for instance, it's always hiding under the fat. And the only way to probably see it is to turn your head in a certain position in order to see this angle of the jaw. So the angle of the jaw is going to be quite crucial for us to establish the rotation, like how exactly the limits of the rotation will happen, because we're going to rotate it into this direction, basically from here. So since this is going to be our pivot point, it's quite important to establish this angle. So yeah, something like this. Let's just think. So there is a interesting gap here that goes then under the cheek there and basically connects there. So in terms of just look, kind of looks like this. So now we need to find a way to simplify it. So this was a side view for us. Let's just try it on a front view. So front view, same. We have the place of connection closer to the ear hole. Let's see the skull here. The skull, by the way, on the side doesn't have an ear hole at all, which is interesting. But we have ear hole here. So again, it's at the same line, and at the same line where the cheekbone is going to be placed. It's kind of under the eye. Hole. There's a lot of holes. So either way, so this one is definitely going to be a sphere, no doubt about it. So the question is how to simplify this part. Should we create two separate primitives for it, or should we just take one big primitive? Let's just analyze each jaw and see the connection. Usually it's round. It's rarely has some kind of angle to it. So this one kind of an angular, but it's still round. This one is completely round. It's just basically like from one primitive we're just cutting away a certain area, like creating a... Let's just analyze the form itself. Okay, so yeah, we're barely going to see this transition here. So there is an angle somewhere here. Yeah, talking about the fact that usually human faces are isometrical. So I already talked about it multiple times. One of the ways to create a good looking face, or at least realistically looking face, is to add asymmetry, because if we're going to try to create a symmetrical effect here, it's just not going to work, because there's no symmetrical faces. They might seem more symmetrical than usual, but usually you don't have a symmetrical face. They're quite asymmetrical. So again, even this part of the nose is kind of... And of course, the more symmetrical we're going to make it, the more pretty it's going to look like, but at the same time, we're going to completely kill the realistic element of it. So because of this, we always need to think about making the face slightly asymmetric. There's like small change is going to make a big difference. So for instance, just changing it like less than a pixel, right here we're going to make quite a big change because we're working with 500 zoom. We don't have place for that much of the slight changes, but again, slightly change it is going to make the difference. It's going to create this element of asymmetry, which will make it a little bit more realistic. Again, right here is just too many changes because it's not subtle, because we have too many pixels, not enough pixels, I would say. So just change this face to the point to not make it too ugly. It just still needs to have some element of appeal, and usually appeal is in symmetry, but symmetry is not always appealing. At some point symmetry just becomes boring and uninteresting. It attracts attention, but then it doesn't hold this attention. It's just basically, okay, whatever, it's not interesting. So the small details of asymmetry, this is something that makes us interested in the people's faces, not the actual symmetry of it. Again, symmetry attracts, but then we need to have something that will hold the attention. Just like small element of psychology that we're going to implement in storytelling, so we'll start to work on our stuff. I love this thing. I love to analyze these type of things. Okay, this one is definitely somewhere here, and it's smaller. This is one of the reasons why I want to create, and exactly the direction that I want to create in. So I don't want to create mindless work. I want to create a kind of work that has depth, psychological elements to it, and all these reasons behind those decisions. This is something that just I love. Okay, so for now I'm working on it as just a regular like cubical plane that has some type of a thickness to it. This is one way to start working on it, because we need to understand where these planes are looking, and then we just basically make it a little bit more complex, because again, this is just too robust. It's not organic enough for us. We need to make it much more organic, look a little bit more organically. So, but again, so something like this is going to work from the top, from the front. This area is going to be quite big. Every skull kind of has a little bit different approach to it. There are straight transitions here. There are a little bit more curved transitions. So since we want to create a skull that is going to work for every type of human face, like a base for it, we need to take something in the middle and make a choice. So this thing usually curved, but there are some instances where it's not, where there's a slight transition here. But actually, in most cases, it seems like it's curved. So it's an actual curvature here. There are small, like inside curvature right here, present almost in every skull. We could justify it by separating this area from this area. So this big area is going to be one big primitive, and this area is going to be either one big primitive or just two small primitives connected together. So I guess let's just do this. So again, this area is going to be a little bit like, again, especially at this skull, it's super apparent. like it starts here and it completely separates. So we're going to do the same, and we will create the separation, and then we will connect a separate primitive right here, which is going to be kind of a cylindrical one, kind of a cylinder. So again, pretty similar to how it looks with the teeth, but a little bit more wide and bigger. Okay, so the question is, actually there's not that much of a question in terms of the function, because usually one of the reasons why we're struggling with function, because we don't know what exactly type of primitive to choose here. But with the jaw, it's actually that easy. I mean, this is a freaking sphere, because the movement is going to happen kind of, I don't know, it's actually going to be weird. So there is a like type of movement like this. It actually happens from these joints. So I don't know, I truly think that our jaws can't move from here to here. If movement happens, this movement kind of happens in multiple directions. Well, this is kind of an interesting one. I doubt that rotation happens like this, because we're not going to be able to dislocate our jaw in this area in order to put it in a different position. So it's probably just slight movement right here and here. So like there's a lot of I guess parts that hold in the jaw here, but we definitely will allow this movement to a certain extent. So sphere will help us to do that. So this is the one way how movement works in the jaw. The second movement, and the main type of movement that we're going to operate in terms of the function, is going to be this one. But the funny thing is about the jaw, it actually doesn't work just like this. In reality, when we pulling our jaw down, it actually moves here a little bit. So this, like the joint, so it's kind of slides spherically around this area closer here. When we pulling our jaw back, it basically slides down here and then takes its original place. At least this is the way that I noticed how it works, because like try to open your jaw, try to basically hold this one of your fingers, try to open your jaw as wide as possible, and you will notice that the jaw is actually kind of dislocating from one place and like transition into the other. It's super creepy. It's not something that it feels right, but this is the way that the jaw apparently works. There is a good chance that this is only my jaw, because I dislocated it at some point, and this dislocation wasn't properly healed, and because it's not properly healed, sometimes my jaw is getting dislocated in this area. So, and it's kind of, maybe this is just my jaw, but I believe most of the jaws are actually kind of a little bit more flexible than it seems. So the flexibility of the jaw here definitely should be something like this. And if we're going to look at the skeleton, there's not necessarily a sphere there. There's actually a little bit more complex thing. But we're going to simplify it as a sphere, because I don't believe that we need anything but the sphere. So again, let's just quickly try to draw it, how it's going to be simplified. So again, since this is going to be a sphere, now we need to connect this part. So now either it's going to be a one big primitive like this, so the whole thing, which will connect to the sphere. So how we could do this, we could create a connection like this. So for instance, let's just start with the plane first of a certain look. It's not that hard to draw a plane like this. Like imagine this is a side view. No, this is actually not a side view. What I'm trying to do is a 3/4 view. So let's just imagine this is like a 3/4 view. So our left, which is good. I mean, I believe we will be able to solve the jaw today, which is cool. And again, tomorrow is going to be another stream. It's still going to be an English stream, so Mondays and Tuesdays now are going to be English streams, which is pretty cool. 2 English streams and 3 Russian streams, which all opened to other languages. I mean, again, English stream is open for Russian audience, Russian speaking audience, and Russian streams are open for an English speaking audience. And since most of the information that I'm writing is in English, there's always going to be an element of English to everything that I'm doing, because for me personally, it's much easier to explain those things in English than in Russian. And if it will need a translation, I will translate it specifically for a Russian audience. But ideally for me, it's just easier to work in English because this is the way that I learned. Since this is the way that you learned, you will be able to produce the information the same way. If I would learn everything in Russian, I would probably wouldn't know how these things are properly named in Russian, and instead write them in Russian and needed to translate them into English. But since for me it's just easier to work with English, just because I learn it in English, not because I understand English better, not of course, this is not my native language, so either way. Where was I? I believe we worked on a job. Yeah. So job from the 3/4 view. So first we could imagine like this jaw is one primitive that has some thickness to it. So this is a center line, which we could delete from here now. So let's just imagine that this is a part of our jaw. It's probably going to be a little bit more like this, depending on the jaw itself. By the way, as I said before, each jaw is going to look a little bit differently, Because of this, we just need to understand what exactly the type of primitive we're going to use here, not necessarily create a specific look for it. We're going to work on the look a little bit better, a little bit later. So the main idea, I mean, in each particular instance is going to change the look for this. So for instance, some jaws are going to look like this, but the method of creating this is going to be still the same. We're still picturing it as a primitive, still picturing it this one as a plane. The only thing that we're changing is its silhouette, and that's it. So the design itself. So for us, the main idea is to just find a way to simplify what method of utilizing this primitive and this part of the anatomy we need to use, like starting with the plane, adding thickness to the plane, like removing this part, like cutting away this part and creating this transition. And understanding how to replicate this method from our brain, we will be able to draw this jaw from multiple angles. So again, there's multiple ways to create this. So first thing that we could to create this hole is to take a cylinder and basically what is the operation? If we got it, subtract cylinder from this area. This is one way to get rid of this thing. The other way, again, just cut away cylinder. The other way to create this thing is to, again, picture a plane, create an arc inside this plane, duplicate this plane in our brain, connect those planes together, and get the final result. So this is the way to look at it. Of course, it has improper perspective, but just like imagine like this works like this. So this is another way. Another way to do this, again, it's just additional way to do this, is to try to create a separate ribbon right here. So again, we work on creating ribbons, so we will be able to create ribbons separately. Like imagine like this is a ribbon. Again, remember our ribbon effect and ribbon method. So if we will be able to create a ribbon, the only thing that we need to do is just then add a ribbon here. So just a ribbon effect. So this is another way, and then just basically erase the place of that we don't need. So this is one way to approach it. I mean, ideally it works the same. I mean, we either creating a one plane that basically supports the design of the jaw. It's probably not going to be just a regular plane. It's probably going to have some angle to it here and here in order to create this. We probably will create some curvature. So this one is probably going to be straight or curved inside. It all depends on what type of jaw we're going to work with. Let's just look at it. Yeah, there is a curvature inside, and there is a curvature inside here too. In most of the skulls, inside, inside. So it's like the same here and here. So yeah, we could do this. Almost every skull has this one. Let's just then to create this. So again, create a... Again, taking the same plane, but just modifying the silhouette of this plane into something like this. Then picturing like this is our pivot point. Creating around this pivot point, around this dot, a sphere, which will move our... No, it's probably early. Yeah, let's just not add any spheres yet. First, we creating a second. Basically adding a thickness to this part of the jaw. After we added the thickness, now we establish in the center for this. By establishing a center, we establish the pivot point. Then we creating around this pivot point, which is between this point and this point for this plane. Let's just erase it to be visible. Yep, creating around this one a sphere. And then cutting away this element by either drawing a ribbon effect or creating two arcs for each plane and connecting those arcs together. Truly as simple as that. I mean, we don't need to overcomplicate it too much. And of course, if you're not that familiar with ribbon effects and with those type of things, you might need practice for it. But it's actually relatively easy, realizable. It's not that hard thing to do. Once we created this, again, I'm not taking into consideration this type of curvature because the jaw probably has like something like this, so it kind of goes a little bit inside. Probably has a pretty complex silhouette, like the inside form. We're not going to complicate this one. Let's just work on the actual silhouette, not the inside. So let's just take, for now, picture this one as a flat one, although it's probably not flat. It has some curvature to it. But for now, let's just imagine it that way. Okay, so let's just take all of these things and move them in a place where we're working with heads, because we're definitely going to need those. There. Oh, snap. Let's just put it here. Take this one closer to here. So again, this is jaw. This is brows. We could actually name them not like by names, but actually create numbers that are specified to them. So 3A, 2. So this is number 2. This is 3A. Or it's better to actually name them extremes. Yeah, let's just name them as extremes. Just going to be a little bit more clear. Extreme 2, extreme 1. Since we established that this part is extreme 1, this part is extreme 2. Okay. Cool. So this part is basically what we came up with the design. Looks pretty good. I mean, it's pretty decent. The more we're going to draw it, the more organic it's going to look. So the whole idea is just to understand what method we're going to use behind creating this thing, and the rest is just going to make it better and better each time that we're going to work with it. So now let's just create a connection for it. So to create a connection is not going to be an easy one. So by the way, it's going to be completely mirrored here from the other side. To just make it smaller to create an illusion of changing in perspective. One of the things that I did wrong is not showing you the insides. This is because I'm just looking through it. You always need to establish a see-through, but in order to just basically limit the information, I decided to get rid of the see-through. But let's just imagine that we see through this. We see in that plane. We already established this thing here. So now let's just create a connection. So we have two parts that will work. I mean, if we want to rotate this thing, oh, snap, it's safe. So if we want to rotate this part, of course this is in 3/4 view, it's not going to rotate properly, but let's just imagine this is a side view and it just basically rotates, it works. Yeah, so now we need to add an actual jaw element. So these are the parts that are going to work within a function. By the way, to make this part a little bit more organic, we could make it a little bit more curved. So again, just if you know how to create a curvature for the cube, it's actually not that easy. No, not that hard. I mean, again, usually when you have a cube and you want to make this cube curved or beveled, as it's called in 3D, to create a bevel for it, it's relatively easy. There's an actual constructional way of doing this. We're not going to go with the constructional way. Let's just create kind of, imagine like creating an ellipse, but it's not necessarily an ellipse. It's a little bit more extended ellipse. It has some curvatures here. Oh, let's just do this here. It's almost like working with the cylinder but inside of the cube, but not drawing the cylinder completely. So it's just like creating a curvatures from that side, creating a curvatures from that side, and then connecting those things as a cylinder and erasing unneeded parts. And that way you will basically end up with the same thing as I end up here. Just create a continuation of the silhouette here, continuation of the silhouette here, connect them, erase unneeded. You will end up with this. Relatively easy. Again, needs practice if you don't have experience with it, but it's truly not a hard one to replicate. So, okay, let's just go again, analyze them quickly, and finally continue. So also there is a question about their angle. So usually they're not positioned straight. They're positioned kind of somewhat like this. So there is a slight change in direction here, change in direction here. So basically goes like this. So the same way, we basically continue in the same angle as we continuing with our base. So we're probably going to take the same angle as we created for cutting off the sides for our cranium base, and apply the same angle for the jaw, which will just continue one line. So it's like continuation of the line in terms of like the dynamics. So it's just going to continue from there. And this is something that we might actually take into the consideration when we're going to change facial features. So for instance, if we're going to work with the face that is a little bit more robust in the jaw area, we might not create this kind of direction, but instead create this direction. And especially it's going to work in design. So we might extend this cut by making the jaw of our character super big. And that way we're going to implement the element of the design by basically maintaining the same strategy. So again, it's probably going to be super crazy big jaw, and it's definitely going to be closer to something stylized. But again, it could be the case. We could work on that way. Trying to find the place where we stopped. Oh, come on! Stream again lagging for some reason. There are some drops in speed. They are not like significant. There's just basically gets a drop in a video, then it gets back. Ideally, the only problem is the visual stops basically, and then it continues. I'm not going to draw that many things in 1 second, so it's just, you're not missing that much. And again, yeah, in the end, these streams will end up on YouTube as recordings in Full HD. So, although right now I'm having troubles with qualities and making the quality HD videos because I switched to a different codec encoding method because ENG encoding method stopped working for me. It created lots of lags once I upload videos on YouTube. And because of this, I switched to H.264. But H.264 codec is just not working right for me, for my video card for some reason. I don't know why. For my system, it creates pretty bad quality video, much worse quality than ENG. But ENG just not uploading right for some reason. So again, these things are probably going to be slightly tilted. I'll just establish quite a tilt. So that means that they basically tilted inside. It's probably too big of a tilt here. Let's just make it slightly smaller. And now we need to create a basically transition from this to this. We could go multiple ways. So since we now know the thickness for these parts, let's just see where exactly they'll connect. So they're not necessarily right in the middle. So if we're going to separate this thing into two, in the middle we usually have the middle of the teeth connect, and where teeth are connected. So the middle basically indicates the placement for the teeth line. Right here it's actually a little bit bigger. Like right here, jaw is actually that big that it's actually cuts halfway, even more than a halfway. So considering the fact that this thing will change quite a lot, we might take something in the middle. Let's basically separate it into two, create an extension from here, from the middle, and then know that sometimes it will go up, sometimes it will go down. So for instance, right here we have a super small jaw, and barely noticeable in it. And again, it starts like halfway through from the halfway, so it's kind of super small. And right here too. Let's think about the position, because of course the easiest way is to cut this thing into two, like find a center for it, like picture a cube inside of it. Let's just, yeah, I believe this is exactly the way that we're going to do it. Let's just close those gaps. So our center line, I'm not going to create too many lines here. And somewhere in the center, maybe a bit lower. So again, just cut this into two seemingly equal parts. They're not going to be completely equal, but kind of equal. And this is going to be the place where we're going to start this kind of the jaw. Yeah, so now let's just duplicate this one in order to, if we're going to mess up, not to redraw it multiple times. And we're going to mess up 100%. First try never works. So this copy is going to be our original, and we're going to work on this. Okay, so also question is the placement. I mean, there are going to be a little bit wider jaws, there are going to be a little bit more enclosed jaws. So for instance, this jaw has quite close proximity for each part towards each other, and because of this, it basically creates kind of a little bit more protruded teeth. If we have more space, that means that teeth are a little bit more like, I don't know, distributed, a little bit more curved. So the curvature of the teeth probably will be established by the width of the jaw. So the bigger this distance, the more again, it will create this type of curvature if the distance is going to be that way. If it's going to be closer, the curvature is going to be a little bit more extreme. And as a result, teeth are going to be a little bit more enclosed. So they're going to be closer together. So here what we're doing is, again, we're not necessarily creating a separate primitive. We apply a ribbon effect. So again, we're just basically continuing this face. Not the face, but I mean, it's called planes and it's called faces in 3D programs. So when I'm talking about the face, it's just, I mean, the plane. So we could continue this plane. This plane basically continues this curvature. You can look at this as a ribbon, but again, usually we are working on ribbon effect only when it has like complex transitions, something like this, and these transitions are overlapping. So this is usually where we're going to implement ribbon effect. It's probably the wrong one. It needs to be a little bit more. Yeah. So since we don't have it here, it's just a something like this. So look at this from the top view. Not necessarily a ribbon, but again, just a plane, curved plane. And I guess here too, just the only thing that we need to establish is the direction. It's definitely not going to be straight. It's definitely not going to be like this. It's probably going to go inside. Let's see. It's actually relatively straight. Maybe sometimes kind of goes inside. Sometimes goes outside. So again, apparently it depends on the features and on the race. So depending, so the direction for this part is going to be decided, the angle of the jaw is going to be decided by the human characteristics, like the specific human features, which for now we are dropping. So because of this, let's just take a little bit more common one, either straight to simplify or support this tilt that we already created for this thing to make a little bit more logical transition. And in terms of the size, I believe it changes quite a bit. So it might start small here, but then it goes bigger here. Yeah, definitely starts smaller here, but then it basically gets bigger in this area. So the height of this part of the jaw is going to be bigger. So again, right here starts and then goes basically higher. So again, this is the same height and this is a little bit higher. Probably not the best angle because we're going to draw a lot on top of already existing. Let's just erase it to not confuse ourselves with too many lines. So establishing the center. Center is freaking super important. I mean, almost every subject you have to picture its center line, because this is the way for you to understand where exactly you need to place things, how symmetry is going to redistribute itself, if you can say it like that. Okay, let's just take it something like this. Again, we're repeating the same kind of curve as here, but just making it a little bit higher. So instead of just making it the same height, we're making it higher. And then connecting this one to this one. Trying to maintain the same it's really going to be a quite complex one, because it's going to be like this, then right here it's just going to become straighter, and right here it's just going to be straight. Maybe we don't need to apply this curvature, we just end up with a straight line. It's just going to be much easier. Let's just go with a straight line for now. Erase it, just go with a straight line, because we have a straight line here, kind of. I mean by straight line I mean this thing. So it's straight. It doesn't have from the side this type of curvature. It has curvature from that plane that we're not seeing, but it doesn't have any curvature here. It's just a straight line. And in order to maintain this straight line, again, it's just kind of continuous. It's straight here, 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 and it also will continue here, but it just will grow in size. Yep. Again, just making this one a little bit bigger. Let's just place it here. It seems everything works. How much time? We have about 30 minutes till the end, so we already almost solved, by the way. We almost solved it. We will need to make small adjustments when it comes down to this area, because once we will start to add to this area of the bottom jaw, like the place for the teeth, we might slightly kind of change it. But ideally, again, we're going to picture it as one, and when we're going to start to add teeth, we're just going to create the direction for the teeth a little bit like out. So instead of, so for instance, this is our jaw. It's kind of relatively straight, and teeth are going to go in the opposite direction by creating this tilt from the bottom. In most cases, this is the way the teeth are actually placed. They're not straight, never. Almost never. There are exceptions, I believe. There is exception to everything. So everything that we're doing right now is not necessarily like the only way to do it, of course. Again, as I explained yesterday, I'm just trying to find my own personal methods that will be logical for my brain. Of course, I could take this information or similar information from some type of book or material, like reference or whatever. But again, for me personally, this is the way that my brain works. This is the way that my brain works, likes to solve problems, and that way I will remember it better and understand it better, because I'm developing kind of how to simplify this. Okay, it kind of doesn't look right though. And the reason why, because this line has to go there and only then starts to rise somewhere in here. I started raising it right from here. Again, we have to maintain this kind of direction to a certain point, and only after it will turns the corner, it will start to grow. So probably from here it will start to finally get higher. Again, as I said before, if you're not going to be able to do the same or similar thing, if it's too hard for you or whatever, the only reason why we'll be able to do this is because we have basics that I talked about. Again, before we will be able to learn how to simplify efficiently, we need to learn the instruments which we're going to use to simplify. We need to understand how to draw planes separately, ellipses, how to connect them and create plane ellipses or ellipsoplanes. I don't know, whatever works best for you. Start with ellipse, then create a plane that will support this ellipse, or create a plane and then draw ellipse inside of it, so basically connect them. Then using this information, learn how to create primitives. Again, you will be able to draw all three types of primitives: cubes, cylinders, and spheres, if you will learn how to use all these three things. Because in order to create cubes you need planes, in order to create cylinders you need ellipses, in order to create a cylinder properly, position it properly in space, you have to create it inside of the cube. The same goes for the sphere. Sphere usually created from ellipses, and usually created inside of the cube in order to understand its position in space. So these are the basics that you have to know, at least, in order to do this. The rest is just kind of a complex or some seemingly complex operations that we're implementing with our basic primitives, by adding and operations to work with them, and also modifications or methods. So there are methods and there are modifications. So methods is the wired, cylinder, ribbon effect, and wired cube. They could be closed, open, all of them. And modifications is basically limited operations and extended operations, where limited is limited by one plane, one edge, and one point. They're singular. And extended operations is basically connection of multiple things, connection of multiple edges, planes, points, and Boolean operations. By right here we're adding and removing, right here we're just moving or scaling. So these are kind of the basics, and that it's better to understand. And of course, in order to draw them in space properly, you have to understand quite good understanding, or have a quite good grasp of the perspective. Not necessarily understand it like fully, but at least understand how it works. Or you're just going to draw isometrical cubes that don't support perspective at all. I mean, they're all going to look weird. So for instance, we can draw this type of cube because the perspective will always converge there. So the only way to get this type of result, if this is the actual look for the cube, when this plane is small and this plane is just bigger. So, but it still kind of has to support the same perspective and converge in our perspective pivot point or vanishing point. So again, the reason why this cube is this plane is bigger, although ideally if it will go inside of the perspective it has to become smaller, but there are situations when the subject itself looks like this. So in order to make it a little bit more clear, let's just try to put it inside of the perspective. So again, this is completely wrong. I mean, this is our super weird horizontal line. I just want to make this problem go away pretty quickly. If you want to get to our perspective work, check out the previous streams. We worked on perspective a lot. So we talked about lots of things there. I'm not going to revisit it on multiple occasions here yet. Later. So again, this is just a tilt. And there is a tilt here. The same tilt is going to be there. The same tilt is going to be there, and only there it will connect. So again, they're just changing. This is just a different type of primitive. Whatever. So again, super tired, kind of not feeling it. So sorry if I'm kind of explaining into nowhere. Okay, get back to a thing. So I guess this is kind of it when it comes down to the jaw. I don't believe that we could simplify it much simpler. I mean, there is no way to simplify it clearer. Again, there's multiple methods to utilize it. There is a way to like picture an actual primitive here. But again, why if better solution is going to be just picturing planes and creating a thickness for those planes. It's just much easier to work with one plane and then turning this plane into a primitive. Although ideally this is an actual primitives, which is gonna look something like this. But we started to create this primitive from one plane, and then added the thickness to this plane. Added side, added the top, and added the bottom and the back. Just made it a 3D. Yep, this is quite dynamic one. I mean, it basically changes in perspective. It starts bigger here, goes smaller there. It's quite interesting result we got. So yeah. So this is kind of the way that we solved this problem. So again, we started from plane here, we started from plane here, we started from plane here, which seems like a good solution because again, when it comes down to just basic primitives, it's just not efficient enough, because if we're going to create a cylinder right here, we have to create too many operations with the cylinder in order for this to look like what we created. Sometimes it's just easier to take the plane and then create something from the plane. Because again, we could look at this one as one big cube. Could be the case, yes, but again, if we would look on this as a cube, we need to remove all these edges. We need to add something inside, we need to subtract. Why? If just much easier to take the plane, create a side kind of silhouette for it, add a thickness to it, subtract from this thickness, or subtract from plane. It's even easier, just taking the plane, subtracting from the plane, duplicating and then creating a thickness for this plane, for the result that you get. This is the solution too. So again, just trying to find a way to logically look at all those complex things in a little bit more simpler way as just basic primitives, which is the whole point of simplification, truly. The reason why I'm doing this is just to learn how to see simplified things. So again, we're looking at this thing, okay, we're seeing a sphere. We're looking at this thing, okay, we're seeing a plane which has a thickness to it. If we learn how to draw the silhouette for this plane, we'll be able to properly create it. Of course, the jaw is usually not cubical. It has slight kind of curvature here. Almost every jaw. There are some jaws that have a little bit more angle to it. This is the other part of the design when we start to complicate things a little bit more. When we start to create transitions like this, which will make this jaw look a little bit more organic, of course. And again, it's not going to be that hard because we're just continuing the plane, the base plane, and turning it into something like this. The same goes with these transitions. If we don't like that this transition is flat, we always can create something like this and make this transition smooth and support the organic look of it. Although I don't know if it's actually there. Let's see. Yeah, jaw actually has some type of a smooth transition here. It's just not, it's not cut away completely. It has like a smooth transition from one point to the other side. And also usually, as you see, I mean, sometimes this part seems like a completely different plane direction. Which one of the things that I thought about, but then we decided to just basically connect them together. So one of the ways to showcase this change is not to make it a part, hopefully it will look right. Like, imagine that it's just smaller and the transition is here, it's quite different. But it's just overcomplicated stuff. It's just better to look at this as one continuous primitive or form that goes into one another, so it creates kind of a seamless effect. Although in reality there is a seam right here that separates kind of this one from this one. There are some small adjustments in this parts, of course, that we after implementing which we will be able to separate those fully. But again, these are the small details when we will be able to create once we will need to draw this as the actual skull. If we just need it as a good sketch for the human face or form, this one is just more than enough. Yeah, and of course, yeah, let's just add those. Let's just get rid of this line, which was just a directional line that we created. To support the direction. It's just creating a smooth transition instead of a flat transition that we had before. So like imagine like this one slides down like this instead of the thing that we had before. So this was before, this is now. It needs some practice though, but it's actually quite cool. So functionally, since the only place that we're basically thinking about is this, come on, this one. The next thing that we need to create, and is probably not going to be today, although we might think about it today, is to create a place for it right here. But as we know, the place for this is going to be created by the cheekbone. And this is the next thing that we're going to probably design, because now we see a connection between our extreme 2 and extreme 1, and now we will find an answer how to design something that is in between of those, because the origin point, so the design of the cheekbone needs to support this function, so it needs to be spherical in order for this sphere to move properly. And considering the fact that we talked about the weird type of movement for this part, that it kind of has to be able to not only rotate but actually kind of slide a bit. So it needs to be slide somehow, and in order to create the slide, we'll probably need to create quite big gap right here. So it's not just going to be completely enclosed space in which we're not going to be able to move the sphere except by just regular rotation. We need to create some space right here in order to make sure that it will support this free movement, in order to make this jaw kind of operate inside of this thing and change accordingly. So if you're going to open the mouth completely, it's probably going to slide somewhere here. If we're going to close the mouth, it's probably will slide here within the rotation, with the addition of the rotation. In its regular state, it might be maybe in the middle. If we're going to press our jaws kind of super hard, it might shift a little bit down, like inside. If we're going to open the jaw, it will go a little bit outside. So this is the way that we're going to basically implement the function when it comes down to designing the cheekbone. And yeah, considering that, we're probably going to continue with the cheekbone tomorrow because we have like 15 minutes till the end. The only thing that I have time for, I believe, is just to go over all these designs, plan how to do them, and just finish on that note. Again, not now, still we have like 15 minutes or so, maybe less, but hopefully in this time I will be able to finish it. So okay, so what we did so far, we created a pretty decent simplification for the jaw. We explained step by step how we end up with this solution. We managed to design this part of the jaw with the function in mind. By the way, when it comes down to how it's going to look, it's actually then going to translate into the sphere, and it's going to kind of fuse them together, so create a smooth transitions. So it will basically connect with the sphere. So again, there is a sphere separate, but it's kind of a part of one big thing, which is not necessarily works for this area. This is probably one of the reasons why we would probably need to make this area a little bit more curved later in order to support the transition to the sphere. Because again, if it's going to work just like straight one, as flat, it's not going to create a proper transition into the sphere. We already talked about transitions. We'll talk about transitions later once we will get to an end. We talked about the kind of, in Russian it's like литые переходы, but in English it's just the transitions. So I guess there's no way to call them any other way. We're talking about the transition. Oh snap, my ear. We're talking about these type of transitions where we're basically taking one cylinder, combining it with the other cylinder by creating a transitional effect. The same way we taking the sphere and taking this kind of this type of transition. And again, in order to make this transition seamless and look right, we need to create, because sphere has some curvature, we need to continue this curvature right here. So because of this, in order to create this smooth transition, we probably have to make this area curved too quite a bit. But again, it's not that easy. You just kind of create those smooth cylindrical transitions and connect those cylindrical transitions to the sphere. So this is kind of the way that we're doing it here. And the lack of pixels probably not going to be able to showcase it properly, but still, again. cylindrical or spherical, basically elliptical transition, and then we're just basically adding half ellipses here and making the same type of transition in order to make it a little bit more organic. The same goes with this one. Again, as I said before, ideally it's not going to look just like a cubical one. It's going to we're going to keep right here the way that we created it first, and right here we're going to create a modified version of it in order to basically like understand how we end up with this a little bit more organic look. So we're probably going to support this till the end. So now we need to continue to support this curvature from start to finish, potentially. Although I don't believe that it's going to be curved here. The curvature probably will change because we're going to create the inner parts to put teeth inside of them. And again, as I said before, teeth are going to be directed in this direction, so we're going to go there in order to create a contrast retransitioning. So yeah, less than 10 minutes left. What else we didn't talk about? So again, in terms of the thinking, this is a good simplification. I mean, it's not that easy to recreate. There are small changes that we need to make in order to make it look a little bit more organic, but when it comes down to the base, it's in terms of what method we need to use here in terms of the approach, how to simplify it. This is the easiest way, I believe. Just start with the plane, create a cutaway from this plane, add another plane like this. We're actually going to create a little bit different version of it here. Erase the thing that you don't need, and the rest is just the small modifications. So again, finding the center, adding a sphere, then connecting the sphere to this part in order to create an organic transition. Again, the way to do this is just basically add elliptical transitions here in order for these transitions to seemingly continue into a sphere. And these transitions have to be supported in this area too. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to make this one a ellipse first. But again, if it would create too many ellipses, it would look weird because it would be harder to connect them together. But ideally, it's kind of a little bit more elliptical form here, because if we're going to look at this area, well, it's not necessarily an ellipse, it's actually kind of flat. We don't have a chance to look at it from multiple views. I believe it's still flat even inside, so I doubt that there's a cylinder right here. So, and transition from this kind of a sphere into here probably not going to be even spherical or soft. If you will try to create a transition of the sphere into a plane, it's actually quite not easy thing to do, especially if this plane has a certain thickness to it. But it's possible. Just kind of continuing the ellipses and get something like this in the result. So yeah, this was kind of the way to design the geo. Of course, there's multiple approaches how we could approach the simplification of the geo, not to start with the planes, but start with the primitives. But as I said before, starting with the primitives is just sometimes too hard with the organic. This is the reason why we're working on creating drapery with planes. because in order to support the unpredictable flow of the drapery, which is controlled by the gravity, the only way to control it is to picture drapery as the plane with a certain silhouette that changes in space by form line, by basically waves inside of this form, inside of the silhouette. And that way we will be able to create a drapery transitions like this. So we started with the regular plane, but then we starting to add transitional effects, and by understanding how this drapery potentially could form, basically creating a form lines to support those transitions. The same way we could actually create a landscapes from far. I mean, imagine like this is a big mountain, like in scale, like this is a human. This is a human right here, and this is the big mountain, relatively big, because human probably wouldn't be even visible here. So this is a tree, a lot of trees right here. This is a mountain range. There is a river right here that we could create here too. This river goes up, rather it comes down in terms of the flow. So again, the same methods we could create to use to create even landscapes. So the planes are actually quite a good kind of solution. Working with planes definitely helps us a lot in terms of the simplification. It's much simpler than analyzing a crazy primitive inside space, but we're still kind of creating a primitives because again, in result, this is just a freaking cube. I mean, this is just modified cube, nothing else. Yeah. Again, cutaway cylinder, sphere. The same. So again, knowing how to draw cubes, knowing how to draw cylinders, and how to draw spheres, and kind of limited operations, and quite a bit understanding of extending operations, you will be able to truly design almost everything. So because you will have the instruments, and the rest is just kind of forcing your brain into this understanding, because it's not clear from the beginning. It's not clear how exactly this works, because at the beginning I believe I didn't saw the connection for those primitives to the complex form, no matter how people explain it to me. I mean, there were so many awesome artists that tried to explain this in their videos and their courses, and it wasn't clear. There was no book that actually helped me to understand this. It was just like experience and all this combined information when it finally started to make sense for me at some point. I guess you just have to go through it. You have to believe that this is the way that it is, and at some point you will understand that this is exactly the way that it is. And of course there are ways to learn how to draw in a different way by just repeating stuff, but again, my approach is an intellectual approach. Again, I'm separating two approaches. We're kind of finishing already. Let's just close it on this note. I have two approaches to learning. One approach is analytical, like kind of a intellectual approach, which is a kind of thing that uses your brain instead of the repetition. And there's just a regular approach. It doesn't mean that it's not intellectual. It still has some level of intellectual element to it. You still have to kind of uncontrollably analyze what you're doing, but in most cases you rely on repetition the most. And my method, which I love because of the fact that it's just easier for me, I don't like just mindless repetition. It doesn't work for me, and because of this I'm using intellectual method, which is, or approach, which basically utilizes your brain and a little bit more like complex analysis. And by creating a links inside of your brain, this neural pathways and neural connections of this understanding, you will draw a little bit more efficiently, not even a little bit, much more efficiently, because now you're going to put it through the prism of analysis and logic, which are human operate. Most of the human operate by logic, not by some weird sense, and etc. Although as artists we tend to, I don't know, think about ourselves as some type of I don't know, spiritual being, although in reality we still have to go through these analytical steps, because if we just go into give ourselves away to random fate or whatever, it's just not going to be productive. It's just not. I mean, it's not going to be efficient. We're not going to learn that quick. We're not going to learn at least efficiently. In terms of the speed, it might take even longer if you're going to use this approach, because it's kind of a hard one. You have to analyze lots of stuff. You have to connect pieces together. Hopefully with time it will be clear. But for now, this is the way that it is. At some point I will create a little bit more clear tutorials about it. Right now it's just a raw information. That is just the way that my brain works at this point. At some point we will create better, kind of a little bit more clear understanding, and it's not going to take us 2 hours or so. Like 15 minutes on like clear understanding with examples, with from multiple artists, from me, and in the end we will come up with the solution. So yeah. Either way, this kind of sums up the session. Again, tomorrow we will continue in English to work on the next part. So the next part that we're going to work with is going to be, let's take our jaw as the kind of finished almost one. So the bottom jaw is basically realized, even considering the function, because it's definitely the function element now will be explained a little bit more once we will start to work on the cheekbones. This cheekbone is supporting the function, because cheekbone actually has a inside place for this kind of part of the bottom jaw. So because of this, we're going to connect them that way. But either way, the next thing for us is the cheekbone. Cheekbones, which is the thing that we started to work on a little bit here, and understand that how exactly it needs to support the function. The rest is just understanding how to simplify it. So we will continue with this tomorrow. So hopefully, step by step, day by day, hour by hour, we will solve one problem at a time. And there's not that many problems here. We don't have a list of 20 things. We have a list of 5 things, even less probably, if we're going to get rid of the transition. With slight kind of subcategories, but still, it's easier than just having lots of unexplainable things inside our brain. So this system at least structurizes things and makes us a little bit more aware of what we're doing and why we're doing it, instead of just mindlessly redrawing one thing all over and all over again until it will click. Again, some people learn that way. I have nothing against it if it works for you. It just personally doesn't work for me, and because of this, sometimes I'm a little bit against it, because this is just not the way that my brain works. But again, it doesn't mean that I'm not kind of supporting it or whatever. Well, whatever works for you, utilize it. I mean, if you like repetition, if the best way for you to learn is to repeat one stuff all over and over again, and only that way your brain will understand how to work with it, do it by any means, it's awesome, it's fine. But again, I would still find a way to understand how your brain works, and actually use the best solution for your brain. And if your brain after a lot of repetition seems like it's too slow and it's not working, try different methods. Try analytical method, maybe intellectual method of utilizing your brain more than your practical ability will help you better. This is just the way, this is the only thing that I'm kind of pushing out there. Just try things, not just do whatever people are saying you to do, telling you to do. Just have your own mind and have your own brain, I guess. On this positive and kind of a weird note, we're going to finish this stream and this session. Thank you for watching, thank you for being here, have a nice day or night, and we see you in the next session, which is again tomorrow. As I said before, to repeat myself, from now on we're going to stream 5 days a week, 2 days English streams on Mondays and Tuesdays, and from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday we're going to work with in Russian. And again, all these streams are completely open to an English-speaking audience and Russian-speaking audience too. Спасибо Бобу за то, что притаранил тоже, да, посидел, посмотрел. Тоже приятного времени, приятных снов, всем спокойной ночки, и yeah, see you in the next session, which is again tomorrow in English. Bye. Tony says bye too.